Alright boys, today I'll be reviewing one of the most unforgiving but fun games I've played within the past 2 years. The premise is simple. You as in the player, happens to lead a squad of mercenaries whose work is to finish contracts from many sorts of clients. The game itself is a turn-based RPG with seed-based maps made by Overhyped Studios, released in 2015. I'll give you guys a quick rundown of the game's selling points. The game has certain mechanics like spoilable food, limited total ammo of your inventory, and others that sets it apart from games of its genre. Adherence to realism in these mechanics make each fight a calculated cost-benefit decision. The art style is rough in a good way, really good at conveying the sort of setting the game takes in. Sound design is on point, hits feel brutal and has actual impact, and not to mention the music. It's excellent. Freedom of character builds with different backgrounds, offering random events that suit said backgrounds. So you can end up making different sorts of mercenaries to suit niche purposes you want, and with a barbershop you can pimp out your mercs even more. Since it's turn-based, you can play this game in windowed mode while simultaneously chill and browse the internet. Maybe even do the dishes too while you're at it. If you like reading fantasy novels, this game is pretty good at making you feel like you're in one, with all these nicely written texts that occur in most of what you do in-game. I'd rate this game a solid 4.5 out of 5. The hours I spent here speaks for itself. Check out the Steam store page I put on the description down below. Get the DLCs too, because not only they add additional enemies, they also add stuff like armor add-on and craftable potions. Before I elaborate on these points, I must warn you here that I don't recommend this game if you're the sort of person who likes the more chill or easygoing ones. Even after all those hours, I still get my arse beat in Iron Man expert difficulty. Buy this if you're into something that can last a long while in your game library through the sheer depth of its mechanics. So, with all of that in mind, I'll elaborate on the most things I mentioned. The game is laden with design choices where it really ensures that you start thinking like you're running a service business and your mercs are the employees. I'm not ashamed to admit that in the process of ensuring the survival of my merc band, I've picked the bad or evil choices. An example of a mechanic in this game that sets it apart from other turn-based RPGs is retiring your mercenaries is not something simple. In most games, dismissing combat units is a rather trivial decision, or you try to cut down on maintenance cost. This game actually gives you the choice of paying your mercs their severance payments or just opt out of it. I think it's a mechanic that should be implemented in more games, as it really reminds you that these are not just some faceless mooks. These are people that join you for their own goals. I may be reading too much into this, but that's what I assume the devs are trying to do by having this mechanic. But at the moment, someone can just arrange an accident to happen with one brother, who they don't plan on keeping around. Maybe even have them go skinny dipping in a swamp alongside a group of bandits who want to turn him into pincushion. Perhaps the devs can somehow give the player more incentive for paying. Perhaps after a couple of weeks the retired merc ends up opening a store in the nearest settlement where the player retires them. Now the guy offers you a 10% discount in weapon prices in that village because he's still got both eyes and a work in mind when he did leave the band. Not going to judge the devs if they don't think something like this is worth implementing. I myself know jack squat about programming, and after seeing how a picture of a coconut can somehow ensure TF2 even works, game programming is still a giant black box to my eyes. Another mechanic that other games should consider adding is ammo. Not just like how many shots your missile units can do in a single battle, but how many total ammo that your mercenary band is carrying in their figurative or literal wagon. This puts you into seriously considering your mercenary team composition, and whether you should bring out those 2 crossbowmen hanging around in your reserve or let them stay to conserve ammo. Example on why I think this mechanic is somewhat significant is that I played a lot of Warband, you see. Last time I played, nothing's really stopping me from using an army of crossbowmen for attacking a fortress. Just enough to ensure that garrison doesn't sally forth to end my cheesy ass. Tell them to hold fire so they raise their shield up. Wait till the enemy's ammo runs out, and then I deplete my army's bolts into their faces, before I tell them to retreat and repeat the process till I capture said fortress. It was sort of funny the first few times I did this, but in the end, I'm just taking advantage of the limitations of a PC game's AI programming instead of actually pulling off a brilliant maneuver. Food can also spoil, and the more men you have, the more food you're going to have to bring. Compound this with your more high-born men not going to put up with you feeding them only grains for a week. Equipment's break and have to be repaired. Not only this costs gold, but also takes time. So if your warband look like a bunch of mangled looters and scrap metal, you better run from the angry roid-rage northerners. Things go bad to worse if your men receive injuries from a bad fight. Luckily, the game does have facilities where you can pay to repair your equipment at a moment's notice, or a temple where your injured brothers can get treated to recover faster from said injury. All of these mechanics combined make sure that you have to really think things through before you engage an enemy group, which is a good thing in my opinion, as you are here playing a mercenary company, not some chosen one in some old emperor's dream fated to close shut the jaws of an otherworldly realm. But I digress. The sound design really does sell the idea that your hammer strike managed to crack someone's skull, or the stab actually hurts. A lot of the music in-game is made by two guys from Hamburg in a duo called Breakdown Epiphanies. They're really good. Be sure to check out their YouTube page to see what other projects they work on, and link is in the description. Since this game offers you a wide selection of backgrounds your mercs can come from, you end up being able to create different character builds depending on whether you are in early game, mid, and finally end game. An example of how certain builds are made in early game is how perks like Nimble really does add to a brother's survivability. But as the game goes on, the company starts to get heavier armors that does not suit the perk. Characters with builds like this won't last very long in more difficult fights unless it's a more specialized build. In the base game, there are 3 different kinds of enemies that correlates with the endgame crisis it has. The crisis that can be difficult but skippable would be the Noble War, where noble houses decide they don't agree with their borders anymore, and this is where you, a greedy mercenary company leader, get to reap big rewards. But the risks are not little. The house you choose to side with will send you to small fights and skirmishes early on, culminating in either a siege or helping an army of the noble house you side with in a decisive battle. Now, this might seem simple, but let me tell you how a noble army works. There's the footmen, tanky but not high in damage, the billmen. Now, if you see one with one of these, you can somehow relax. God forbid you find someone with a billhook. These guys will shred your mercenaries' armor and leave them vulnerable to low armor damage but decent flesh damage weapons. Finally, the worst defender of them all would be the arbalestiers. These weapons mean business since their bolts can bypass armor and go straight to flesh damage. Good thing that this crisis will not result in getting entire cities trashed, so you still have more places to get contracts from. Another crisis is the undead crisis. The undead in this game consists of 2 types, the ancient undead and whatever some local necromancer managed to scrounge up. Ancient undead are the remains of a long-gone empire that somehow managed to reanimate themselves. They fight akin to the real-life Roman Empire, moving with discipline as if they don't realize they have long since died. In this crisis, the necromancers and said ancient undead managed to team up together to destroy civilization. Honestly, I don't think they are too annoying until you start seeing fallen heroes and ancient honor guards. Lastly, at least ignoring the newest DLC, is the Greenskins crisis. In this crisis, the world is under assault by a sudden alliance between cunning goblins and the brutish orcs. In this universe, goblins are not these low-level guys who, in most fantasies, you kill in early game. Not here. They are vile, opportunistic creatures who employ the sort of tactics that would make Nam look like a jungle book. As for the orcs, they are big, mean, and green, standard stuff. Mentioned in the quick rundown, the writing on this game is stellar. Note, take it with a grain of salt, as I don't like to read novels that often. For example, which brings us to the next topic, that is DLCs. The first DLC to be released is Lindworms in 2017. This DLC adds a bunch of giant green snakes with limbs here to make everyone in the place miserable, especially your merc company. They not only hit like a truck, they have quite the massive bulk of flesh for your soldiers to cut through, covered in scales that takes at least 3 people to chip away fast enough. As if to make things worse, when they do start bleeding, their blood is acidic and can melt away armor which is already battered from breaking the scale's armor value to begin with. I think this DLC is rather meager, as it only adds this one enemy that is not easy to kill, yet does not offer loot that is worth the fight. Next one to be released is Beasts in Exploration in 2018. Like the name says, now the mercenary company gets to take on monsters who offer different challenges from the rest. A background coming from this DLC is the dedicated Beast Hunter that is equipped with stats suited for less direct combat. It also adds this whole new building where you can fabricate things out of the trophies of the monsters you've slain in combat. A solid DLC. The enemies have been sort of rebalanced to ensure that they don't become too obnoxious to deal with, as back then, these sleep-inducing monsters used to be a major pain to deal with, at least from what I heard. Warriors of the North. Available to purchase in 2019, lets the players fight barbarians who hail from the frozen tundra of the north. Within the DLC, the barbarians themselves pose the sort of challenge that I hesitate to raid their deeper camps as, how do I say this? The barbarians are pretty deadly on their own, but they're manageable. In these camps, though, they often spawn with these giant trolls that are not only recover health, they also shuffle formations. This DLC also adds different backgrounds that further increases the replay value of the game itself. It's easily worth the money. The latest DLC as of this video, Blazing Desert, is released in 2020 last year. In this one I do think the devs outdone themselves, as it's reminiscent of expansions from days long gone. It adds 3 new settlements in the south of the map, inspired by the civilizations from the Middle East, alongside new beasts, quests, backgrounds, and even a new endgame crisis, the Holy War. And just like the last, Breakdown Epiphanies continues to impress with their work here. The DLC also adds a new follower system where your mercenary company can now have dedicated blacksmiths, cooks, quartermasters, and many non-combat roles that can further boost your company's performance and improve the ease of logistical management. So that's all I can say about the DLCs. Seeing how the DLCs that overhyped studios release get somewhat better each year, I have high hopes on what sort of new DLCs they'd release this year, if they do plan on doing so. Now for the part where I discuss the things I consider flaws of this game. The game has this difficulty scaling where early on, the first enemies that a player would usually take on are bandit thugs and raiders. Usually they are pretty much either weaker or evenly matched with your mercenary company, but after your company starts getting more powerful, the brigand raiders start getting higher stats and more perks. Same case with the southern nomads, who all of a sudden gains the perk dodge. When combined with their sand throwing ability, they turn into really tanky bandits. I do think that it'd be better for the Iron Man experience if it's easier to bounce back, but difficulty and contract scales over time. Returning from a setback is definitely one of the harder things to do in this game. By doing this, the game lessens the overall maximum margin of error the player must not do in order to thrive. I'm saying this since the player not only loses the merc, who are high leveled, but also their gear when they die, provided their armor is depleted when they are slain. Perhaps if the time-based scaling is removed, people would be more encouraged to press on, despite a bad loss, so they'll perhaps have a better first impression of the game. Iron Man mode seems more like it's a way to punish people's mistakes than to enhance the whole experience of the game so far. Many times in this mode I find myself just abandoning saves where I did mess up the early game. Another thing I don't really find pleasing is how the enemy units don't play with the same rules as the player units do. The nomads in the newest DLC is one of the biggest offenders of this. They have this one ability to throw sand that can cut down at both a character's damage and initiative. Barbarians are also an offender of this problem, and since they have a skill that can cut down on stamina usage to switch positions between units, costing 5 fatigue instead of 25 that the rotation perk uses. When you do recruit mercs with the nomad or barbarian background, you will not get the ability of either enemy types, even though they do cost a pretty penny to pay. Now, a couple of special perks that only enemies get is one thing, but this, it gets ridiculous. But yes, I think these two are the biggest problem I have with the game. Maybe the part where your merc band loses morale when you retreat, even though the odds are severely against you. I'm just saying, the game is very difficult, especially since enemies get more powerful the longer you play. You avoiding combat in a day, even though RNG decided to not give you small enough bands to fight against you within the day, is making your run even more difficult. Still, I think it's more of a nitpick, as this would have been less of a problem if the time-based enemy power scaling was not a thing. All in all, I do think the game is worth the price tag, and it'll provide you hours worth of gameplay. I assume that if you guys stayed in this vid for this long, you might be considering purchasing, or even watching more vids about the game. Consider checking out FilthyRobot's channel if you do intend on playing the game, as he is very good at it and can give you insights on how to take on many of the challenges the game poses. So with all that in mind, thank you to all of you who stayed watching for so long. See you next time, and don't forget to have fun.